14.
There we go. Ask the Podcast Coach for July 14th, 2018.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that fun-filled music. That means it's Saturday. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm your host, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com. And joining me right over there, it's not Jim Cullison. He's off marrying one of his kids. Now, wait a minute. He's not marrying his son's getting married. And so I said, hey, you know what? Who I haven't talked to in a long time, who's like one of the coolest dudes on the planet ever, is the one and only Steve Stewart from stevestewart.me. Steve, how's it going, buddy?
It's going well. You know, those Oxford commas come in really handy when you say things like Jim's off marrying one of his kids. So make sure you place the punctuations in the right place so nobody misunderstands what you're saying.
Yes. And how you been, buddy?
I've been fantastic. I'm just rocking away over here in my podcasting studio, which is actually an editing bay, which is AKA the basement of my house. And I'm loving life, man. It's fantastic. Getting geared up for podcast movement. There's a lot going on. You going to talk about that today at all, or are we just going to move into the content?
We can talk about whatever you want. If you have a question, you can come out to askthepodcastcoach.com/live, or if you want to pop right in here into this little video thing, feel free to go out to askthepodcastcoach.com/join and get your podcast questions answered. And people are like, so is this like free consulting? And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And how long have you been in this since when? You've been in it a long time.
Started my podcast in 2010, retired at 2015, and then started editing for a living in January 2016. So about 7 years.
Yeah.
7 to 8 years to total.
So you work from home.
Yes.
What's the pros and cons? Because some people are like, oh, I think it'd be so cool to work from home. What's the reality like?
I don't want to oversell it, but it's incredible. We're doing a complete juxtaposition here though, because what I was doing during the day job up through 2015, I was on the road a lot. I was going from state to state doing different things. I was an internal auditor, so I had to visit different locations every single day. Sometimes I'd have to drive 4 hours a day just to get there. It was ridiculous. Now I don't drive anywhere. In fact, I've got a 20-year-old used vehicle I paid cash for. I put maybe 8,000 miles on it a year, and that includes maybe 1 or 2 long trips if I drive to a conference out of state. So really, I get to be home all the time. Now, the downside, a lot of people say, oh, you see your family too much. I missed all that. So I'm catching up. I'm playing catch up right now, but it's awesome. Yeah. My daughter goes to work or school, depending on the time of year. And I go upstairs at noon to, have lunch with my wife. She also gets to work from home. And then we all meet for dinner at 6 o'clock. And so it's a very casual arrangement. Very nice.
That's very cool. Yeah. You're like me. Like I'm actually driving to Podcast Movement and I'm excited because my longest drive is my brother's house, which is 17 minutes away. Mm-hmm. Other than that, everything else is 5 minutes here. I live right near the mall. It's like, so yeah. And that's why, and I have a bike. Yeah. That's actually, I take that back. Today I will bike to, there's a, I live in Ohio, and back in the day there was the Ohio Erie Canal. And what's really cool is they have paved where the mules used to walk to pull the canal boat. And it's now this really cool bike path, and you're surrounded by nature and all sorts of fun stuff. So,
yeah.
But let's talk about, you did a cool Facebook post.
Are you going to go to that now, huh?
Yeah, we're just going to jump right in. Do you have that link by any chance?
I do. I'll say it out loud to anybody who's listening. It's stevestewart.me/sponsor partnership. stevestewart.me/sponsor partnership. And if you want, I can put it in the chat room for
I'm going to say, if you could throw that in the chat room, that would be awesome.
I'll give me actual URL. It's going to redirect them to, I'm kind of split between 2 websites, and I really need to just fix that. But that'll take you to this blog post. It's called Sponsorships Equal Partnerships. Otherwise, they're just wasting time and money.
And why do you think that? Like what's driving, what inspired you to make this post?
I will tell you about the inspiration. All right. So I work with Philip Taylor, also known as PT. He is the founder of the FinCon Expo. It's the financial blogger conference now known as the Money and Media Conference. This will be our 8th year working together with him on a few things. One of them is we do a podcast. So he is in there occasionally, but the host is Joe Saul-Sehy from Stacking Benjamins. He's also very involved with the whole FinCon, culture. and then I do the editing and production. Joe is in the middle of moving, so it gets really difficult for him to actually sit down and record these pieces that we need to put the show together. That involves an interview that PT did, and of course, I'm the last place that it goes. Now, we get the sponsorship for this episode, and it is literally a 30-second radio commercial. First time I've had something like that come by, and both Joe and I are like, "This is just like throwing money away." There's so many reasons why sponsorships for podcasts have to be partnerships. And that's what this article is about. Not just because it's of this pre-produced radio ad that we're using in a podcast, but because of all these other reasons that podcast sponsorships just aren't working the way that everybody envisions that they want them to.
Yeah. Do you know if Joe has had sponsors that have approached him that he's then had to turn down?
Oh, I'm sure he's turned down sponsors for Stacking Benjamins for his show. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure he has. There's a different, here's the dichotomy. Now let's use a different word. The difference between a good sponsorship and a bad sponsorship, if you're the host, if you're the podcaster, in my opinion, the difference is the podcast host let me start over again. The difference between a good sponsorship and a bad sponsorship is a partnership, is some kind of a tie-in with the host or with the genre of the show. In the article that I wrote, that I, again, put the link in, and you can go to stevestewart.me/sponsor partnership. That is, there's a piece in there that talks about, it's got to be a connection somehow, whether it's exactly a match for your audience. One of the things I said was, gosh, it'd be great if I just had this ready, huh? Darn it. It's in here, I swear. But that's it's funny. Right. I'll get to it, I promise. Here we go. Mid-rolls for detached products. Detached products meaning they have no association with what the show is about or the audience. Mid-rolls for detached products and services interrupt the listener experience. And I know that we all can point to an examples like we're getting into listening to the podcast and then they broke for a commercial break, you know? Selling legal services on a Hulk fan podcast is just throwing money away, and it makes listeners angry, and you don't want to see the listeners angry.
That is true. That'd be like if we broke right now to do I'm trying to think of something that just wouldn't fit.
Casper mattresses.
Yeah, Casper mattresses. Now there are people that are going to argue and go, yeah, but everybody sleeps. And I'm like, but it's
they came here to ask the podcast coach questions, and we're selling them a mattress.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to then jump in and say, hey, I just bought a Casper mattress and this is what it's done for me, there's a tie-in. There's a semi-partnership there. It's you've got a testimony, and that is one of the things that's going to help to make this sponsorship actually legit.
Yeah. What's interesting is I'm in the process. I keep saying this. I do baby steps on this. I want to rewrite my book, More Podcast Money. And so I was like, I need some real life examples of this. So I started having sponsors on the School of Podcasting, because normally I don't, because that show basically promotes me. I've already got a sponsor. And in doing that, and this is where things get icky, I was approached by friends who have said, I want to sponsor your show. And there's a guy named Derek Sivers who started and made tons of cash on cdbaby.com. He's kind of more of he made a boatload of cash and then gave a ton of it away. He's, what's that word? Philanthropist?
Yeah. Philanthropy. Yeah.
Yes. That's a 50-cent word right there. And, but he has a philosophy, and pardon my French, but if it's not a hell yeah, it's a no. And so I've had people, like I had somebody approach me about promoting their speaker. Like, if you want to be a speaker, come take my class. I'll show you how to be a professional speaker. And I'm like, some of my audience might like that, but not all of them. And I'm like, So it's kind of weird. I've done some things, and like right now I have Chris Curran's podcast engineering school. And going back to what you said, I'm taking the class. So I was like, okay, it's a tie into that. So it is a little odd, but I do hear sponsors at time, and especially pre-recorded stuff. My favorite on when the sponsor gives the bullet points is I actually got the microphone I'm using right now, an RE320, through a barter with Electro Voice. And they sent me over these bullet points, and it was like cardioidinium, whatever word. They got into the super geekiness of the inside of the microphone. And finally I had one of my listeners email me, said, Dave, I have no idea what you're talking about when you about this microphone. And I was like, yeah, how about it's nice and warm and clear. And if you move your mouth around it, you don't have that proximity effect. And that's about as geeky as I wanted to get, proximity effect. And because you know your audience and they don't. So very cool. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm always amazed at, I'm always excited when I hear a new sponsor come on. You know, when somebody's like today, and you're like, oh, here comes ZipRecruiter or here comes stamps.com. And they're like, no, it's, you know, Betty's Baffles. And you're like, the what? The who? You know, it's like, oh, somebody else is, you know, coming in. But yeah.
Now, let me ask you this question now. Are you going to be as attentive to that ad because it's new and it's read by the host? Or are you going to tune out because it's a commercial break because we've been conditioned to skip ads with, you know, DVRs and all that? Or are you really waiting to hear the ads because the way that the host presents it is interesting, it works, it fits, you know what I mean? I'll point again to Joe at Stacking Benjamins. Part of his show is really based around having fun talking about money.
Right.
So he will make really bad transitions from whatever they're talking about into sponsorships. I mean, it's a complete train wreck, and you listen because it's funny, you know. But there's the mid roll in the middle where there actually is a break. You know, he has a strategy to keep people through the break.
Right.
But it's a different approach into the sponsor breaks. I'm actually more entertained by the pre-roll, which is, you know, 15, 20 seconds saying today's show, you know, we're being bought by blah, blah, blah. Then the 90-second mid-rolls that actually then really promote the heck out of the sponsor.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the way it's read a lot of times, I've been listening to Jordan Harbinger, and one of his sponsors is HostGator, and he has his bullet points and he hits the bullet points, but he usually throws in something to make it entertaining because he's tired of saying, you know, you need a website basically. And so he always spikes it up a little bit. I used to listen we're talking early days of podcasting. There was Webmaster Radio. And a lot of times it was about WordPress and all this other stuff. And I would listen. In some cases, even if the topic, like they're talking about CSS, and I'm like, okay, that's the last thing I want to learn. But I would listen because I learned about so many products because they had really good sponsors that fit their audience. And I was like, oh, I didn't know there was that, blah, blah, blah. So that's another key. And then I've heard of people, Ray was doing the tour thing with, I want to say God Save the Pod, but that's not it. It's a political show. It's super duper popular.
You talk about Ray Edwards or Ray Ortega? Because those are both big guys in our space.
Ray Ortega. I want to say Pod Save the Queen. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a political show. And they'd be doing live shows. You paid to get in. And so they weren't going to do any ads. And he said the audience would be like, come on, do Squarespace. You know,
because it became part of the show. It was content. It wasn't just an ad. It was content. And that's really important with anything that you do in your show, whether it's, you know, reading ratings and reviews.
Right.
Hint, hint, we can get to that later.
Yeah.
You know, anything like that. Just if you can make it content, then, hey, the walls are down. Let them in.
That's it. Well, you said the hint. We were talking. I always go out to different Facebook groups in the morning to find different questions and things that people are talking about. And I guess the thing that I'm trying to figure out is by the time somebody gets to a Facebook group and they ask the same questions over and over and over, but it's interesting that people are coming in with what I feel is bad information. And I just want to know where they're getting that from. Like, because we see the same thing in every Facebook group. Like a guy this morning, and I just went, he said, hey, I just left my Podomatic Pro, which right there is not my favorite choice of media host, but at least he was paying for it. You know, they're okay. I left my Podomatic Pro account and I moved to Anchor. It's free and I love it. And I just was like, you know, and then you feel like, do I really want to take the time to say, and I did, I said, hey, just so you know, most free media hosts in my travels, there have been about 5 over the years, go out of business after about 30 months, if not sooner. And then somebody else said, hey, they own your content. And it was just like, I always want to go, where did this person, like, I want to go back and reverse engineer where, like, his path to where he was, to like, what did you type into Google or whatever? Because there's so much advice, and some of it you just feel is like, everybody knows SoundCloud is not a good idea, but yet there was somebody today that said, I finally decided to leave SoundCloud because it sounds like you guys don't think it's a good idea. And we're all like, yeah.
surprising they're still around. Actually, I'm really
Yeah.
kind of glad. But then, if they don't turn it around for podcasters, I think we are going to see that shoe drop. I think it's a problem with, it's definitely education. There's so much you need to learn about launching a podcast, but it doesn't take anything to launch a podcast. You can do it, but you don't necessarily have all the tools in the first 10 days unless you do something like School of Podcasting, take your course and walk you through step by step. So they're going to be getting free information from social media, from other people that they know. And everybody's raving about the newest toy, which over the past year has been Anchor.
Yeah.
The year before that was SoundCloud. So that's why we're still hearing this, is because it's still that, I don't want to say echo chamber. It's really not an echo chamber, but a lot of people they're not searching for what's wrong with using Anchor. They're working for what's the best podcast, hosting service. And people are still talking about the newest thing, which is, Anchor.
That's it. Well, here's how you can make $1 million in podcasting. You ready?
Ready.
You come up with a system so that people can know exactly how many subscribers they have, because that seems to be something else as I was sniffing around this morning, that people are just like, is there any way I can know exactly how many people are subscribed? Whether it's how many people follow me in Spotify? No, there's no way to do that. Or how many subscribers I have in Apple iTunes or podcast, take your pick, whatever you want to call it. And the answer is no. No, you can't. You can go into podcastconnect.apple.com and you can see how many subscribers or what percentage, I think, of subscribers you have. I can't remember. I'd have to go in and look. But the answer is no, basically. And the short answer is there any way I can tell exactly how many people are subscribed? And the answer is no. I thought it was, and again, going back to the previous content, somebody said, oh, I know, I have FeedBurner. And I was just like, wow, really? You missed the whole, like, FeedBurner is awful, comments from 2012? Because, and I explained to this person, I said, hey, I'm like pretty sure that if my phone is set up to check your feed once an hour, FeedBurner is going to show me as that you have 24 subscribers, because I'm going to hit that thing every hour and they're going to go, oh, somebody checked. And so I just thought it was interesting that we're all, and like sometimes I feel like people won't move on. Like there's got to be a way, and they're focusing on all this stuff. Meanwhile, their audience is over here going, we need more content. And I just like, And so it's kind of interesting that I guess why I bring this up is the answer is no. Please move on. Look at your downloads. If you're doing anything with advertisers, most advertisers want to know how many downloads you have after 30 days. It's not how many subscribers. But there are people that have come up, like they'll take, I'm pretty sure in Apple Podcasts, you get the percentage. And I say, okay, then take the percentage amount, because that's only iTunes people. That's only Apple people. Take your percentage and multiply it by the number of downloads you get per episode. In theory, that's how many subscribers you have. I've had other people.
Nice simple calculation. Yes.
Yes. Now, is it accurate? I don't know, but it sounds, there's something to do. I've had other people say, well, if you take how many downloads you have after 48 hours, because in theory, your subscribers are going to hit your feed probably sometime within the first, 48 hours. And that's how many subscribers. And I'm like, yep. Okay. That would be an indicator. I guess whatever you do, just keep it consistent. As long as you do the same thing every week or whatever you're doing, you could get that. But I guess to me, I just look at downloads and go, that's what I'm using to measure, not subscriptions.
And the problem with, counting downloads is we have no idea how many people actually listened.
Right.
There are some things now. I think it's getting better now because so many of the apps and things that we're using is a little more, obviously, if you're interacting with your app, then it's going to tell you that, somebody's listening. Whereas in the old days, we used to refresh our iTunes and download all the episodes and sync them to our iRiver or our iPod. That was a download, but it wasn't a listen until you actually played it. And there was no way to give that feedback. I think nowadays the devices are smarter. That's coming back to us now, but they're still not going to share all. Well, let's think about it. Where are you putting your podcast? Okay. You put it in Apple Podcasts and iTunes. You put it in Google Podcasts. Well, it'll just show up there, right? You'll put it in Stitcher. You'll put it in TuneIn Radio. You'll put it in all these other places, but not all these places are going to share with you their subscribers versus the people who just go to the website and click play. So if you don't know from each and every app developer, how many people are actually hit that subscribe button, there's no way you'll ever know how many subscribers you have. So we got to go back and default to that that little math problem you just gave us, Dave.
Yeah. Or just like, okay, I'm just going to use downloads. And if they're going up, that's good. If they're going down, that's not so good. Craig in the chat room says, how relevant do you think subscriber/download numbers are these days? Perhaps we should be measuring our podcast on the strength of the listener feedback.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. I sometimes get, Jessica Coverman, when she was doing all the ad sales, she'd be like, they want to know how many Twitter followers you have, how many Instagram followers she goes, they want to know not so much about your podcast. They want what's the word? Evidence that you're an influencer. And that's more than just download numbers. And I was like, ooh, that's good to know.
Oh, it totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. We used to have the whole problem with Twitter bombing, so that totally, inflated the numbers.
Yeah.
And downloads don't necessarily mean listens. So if you have, they say, if you hear somebody complain, there's like 10 others who had great experiences. It's a multiple factor. Only one person really speaks up, and it doesn't represent everybody, but it represents a portion. I think it's the same way with a listener who sends you an email or some kind of, a tweet, Facebook post, or whatever. They're the ones who are interacting with you. They're more of the upper echelon of your listener fans than the one who's a casual listener or the one who's just trying you out for the first time and hasn't been really, sold on your show. So the one email you get represents 100 people who don't email. That's the interaction. That's the subscriber, what do you call it? The
indicator.
Indicator. Yeah. The number I would go by is how do you interact with your audience? How often do you interact with your audience? An email, it's like a picture's 1,000 words. What?
Yeah.
An email is 1,000 listeners in my mind. Maybe not 1,000, but you get the idea.
It's a lot. Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast mentioned that the whole RSS tracking subscriber things, he goes, something happened in iOS 11 and later that loads the feed a lot more. So he says, I and everyone else saw nearly overnight spikes in feed stats, but no increase in downloads. So again, that's just my theory was that iOS 11's redesigned podcast app loads data from the feed more often than from Apple's own cache. So again, that feed burner number, or if you're using, I think it's Pinecast, Podbean has a thing too that they track how many times your feed's getting pinged, and that's just, it looks good. It's like, ooh, but it's like saying how many people walked by your storefront versus how many people came in and actually bought what was in the window. That doesn't really mean a whole lot. So
yeah, I would think if we all only published to Apple Podcasts, and if the Apple Podcast analytics were accurate, then we could know. But
we don't. Exactly.
There's no way. So you can invite friends over and say, hey, bring a couple friends over for the party too. You get 100 people in your house for this party. You don't know where they all came from. Now you have to go and talk to each and every person to find out where they came from. Otherwise, you have no idea. Is this one of the friends I invited, or is it a friend of a friend that they invited?
Yeah. And then the nice thing about Apple Podcasts is if somebody has not listened to your last 5 episodes, they haven't even sniffed them, it will stop downloading your show.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way to kind of go. Whereas if I got the Akron Beacon Journal delivered to my house and I didn't look at any of them, they just keep sending them. That's the other thing that always I kind of scratch my head on. We don't hold radio, newspaper, magazines. We don't hold anybody else up to the standard that we have to know exactly what they looked at, when they looked at it. I'm like, we don't hold any other media platform up to this, standard, but
there are no heat maps for podcast listeners.
There's not. It'd be awesome if there were.
You just maybe think about something I hadn't thought about before is somebody who subscribes to your podcast but stops listening after a while, they're still counted in Apple Podcasts as having been a subscriber. That still helps with the rankings,
right?
The charts, but they're not a current listener. So are they a subscriber? Yes. Are they listening? No. That totally blows the whole, how many subscribers do I have? The reason to know that number
true.
Blows out of the water.
Yeah. Cause you do have to, if you want to unsubscribe, it doesn't unsubscribe you, it just stops downloading new shows. So that's, that goes back to that whole thing. So
yeah, I'm subscribed to every one of my clients' podcasts, but a lot of them I haven't listened to because I listen to it basically twice when I'm editing.
Yeah.
So why listen to the download unless I have to do a spot check?
Right.
And I can do that through other means. But yeah, I've got podcasts I'm subscribed to, but don't listen to anymore. And it's always there just in case I want to start up again. But hey, I've got all the other nice new ones to listen to.
That's it. One thing we can talk about here, and then we're going to talk about our awesome supporters. Steve, I'm assuming you're coming to Podcast Movement. I believe you mentioned that.
I am all about Podcast Movement this month.
Yeah, I did not know this, but I had some people that have said I would go, but I maybe the hotels are sold out. I'm not sure what the situation with that is now or things like that. Or for whatever reason, maybe the room and board is an issue. And I saw Dan Franks post this. If you go to podcastmovement.com/room share, it takes you to a Google spreadsheet where people are saying, hey, I've got a room. Are you creepy? No, great. Let's share a room. And I'm assuming that's what that is. Because I know Liquidy has she's in the chat room, and she's got like a half a Airbnb or something of that nature. She had something going on where she's like, if you're not creepy, we could split the cost on this. And so yeah, she says, I've got an Air that I'm sharing from Sunday to Wednesday if anyone is interested. So and of course she's from travelglutenfree.me, I believe, if I remember right. I believe it's a .me website. So that is something I know. Not so much podcasters are creepy. It's generally just dudes. Dudes are fairly creepy. I'm not sure why. Well, I know why it is, but at any rate, that's something that you never know, I guess, in today's society, what's going on. But who's not creepy? That's right, our awesome supporters. Speaking of interesting segues, we do this at the beginning of the month. We thank everybody. The rest of the month, we thank those who are at the Patreon account doing $20 or more. You can be an awesome supporter by going to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And you could be awesome like Josh Liston, who does the onthebubble.podcast.com, which is about, you ever wonder, it's shows that went off the air. He studies the fan campaigns to try to bring them back. So it's interesting just to see the fandom of that. Of course, we have Greg over at Debt. Why can I not say debt? Is it because I get hung up on the B? Debt Shepherd. We'll just pretend there's no B there, which is teaching financial wellness. Jonathan Bloom will help you have a great today. Go over to weeklyawesome.com. Glenn the Geek Hebert, who is not going to be at Podcast Movement. I just heard that. And I was like, oh, that's not fair. Over at horseradionetwork.com. Josh Rivers from podcastingexperiments.com. Max Trescott at aviationnewstalk.com, who was nice enough to let me know that I do another show called The History of the Band Six Shooter. And the last episode I was testing Pippa. And for some reason, when I uploaded the last episode to Pippa, I did not listen to it back. The episode was fine. Somehow uploading it was not. And Max said, hey, do you know, like halfway through the last episode, it just quits? And I'm like, did not know that. So thank you, Max. And then Shane from spybrary.com. And I always mention this. There it is. Who not only has a great podcast, but he also has great coasters. And if you'd like, again, to be an awesome supporter, simply go to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And we thank you to all our awesome supporters for keeping the lights on here at Ask the Podcast Coach. Do any of I know most of your clients are financial peeps, so they're probably pimping their financial services. Do any of them use Patreon?
Yes, actually, the big one that has been doing it for a while and has seen really good success with it is Joshua Sheets with Radical Personal Finance. The guy went all in on his podcast being his product, and Patreon was the way he was getting paid back. It's been doing really well for him.
Now, does he treat that like a sponsor, kind of like we just did?
No, actually, it's more than that because he also has the bonus content and priority listing if you want to call in and ask some questions, things like that.
Yeah. Emily Illiquity says, what's the dress code for the red carpet and the parties? Parties are usually just wear what you are wearing. Clothes generally is the general purpose. For the red carpet thing, I don't know. I mean, I'm wearing a suit. I'm actually contemplating getting a tux. And I'm like, not sure about that. Because I have a suit. Talks not so much, and then you got to worry about, is it going to fit, that whole 9 yards. But most of the parties, you just kind of, you go right from the thing, you go eat if you actually have time to eat. Is that basically what you do, Steve?
Oh, I go wherever the crowd takes me.
Yeah.
Now I do have some, I do have a schedule, so everybody should look at the calendar that they have. I think you can print one now. What are you laughing at?
I'm laughing at Emily says tuxedo shirt and leather pants.
That would be a Dave Jackson twist. Absolutely. You should you know what? Figure out your measurements and then get a tux rented in Philadelphia.
There's an idea.
Order it ahead of time and then just go and get it the night of and then wear it and then give it back to him the next morning.
I think she's referring, I posted a picture recently of me with the skinny tie and leather pants. And I can say from personal experience, leather pants, not a lot of fun. They don't breathe very well. And if you've ever seen the episode of Friends where he can't get his pants off, that's not a lie. It's not a lot of fun. But yeah, I usually just go, I'm with you. It's usually what happens is a session will be over and everybody's like walking into the hallway and somebody will go, well, where are you going? I don't know. Where are you going? And somebody go, oh, I'm going to go to the blah, blah, blah. And everybody goes, okay. And we all, it's the mentality of the crowd. We just, oh, I'm going to go get something to eat. Where are you going? Okay. And then everybody, and then you walk into the restaurant and you see the waiter and the hostess kind of, their eyes get really big when like 27 people ascend on, the Chuck E. Cheese or wherever you.
Yeah, well, that will definitely be the problem with any conference you have 2,000 people at that doesn't have an organized luncheon or something like that, is finding that place to eat. The after, or I wouldn't say after events. There's after parties. Some of them are organized. There's a lot of those pre-conference events. Then there's the unofficial meetups. There's a page for that on Podcast Movement. If you're talking specifically about what we're doing at Podcast Movement, yeah. I'm actually doing a meetup for podcast editors, and it's going to be a very casual thing. And I even said I've got a private Facebook group for podcast editors. I even said, I've got a session at 2:30. When it ends, I'll probably answer some more questions afterwards. And then after that, meet me in the lobby. We'll probably start walking over there at 4. It's 11 minutes away.
That's it. And what you mentioned your Facebook group. It's really cool. What is the name of the group and who is it for and who is it not for?
The Facebook group is the Podcast Editors Club, which you can find at podcasteditors.club. It's not .com, it's .club. And or you can just search it in Facebook, Podcast Editors Club. And it's for people who edit podcasts, whether they do it for themselves, for their own show, and it's just their own thing, or they're doing it professionally for other people like I do, and anybody in between. And it's really a fantastic, active place. And, we're not talking microphones. We're not talking content creation. We're talking about podcast production, the production side of it.
Yeah. So if you come in and ask what's the best microphone, you'll be politely smacked on the knuckles and asked.
No, I delete it with no reservation and no apology. I delete it. And I every day I'm deleting something because somebody says, hey, what's the best hosting service? Delete. That's not what we're here for.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Logic Pro and why GarageBand is not a good editor. And let's talk about,
Why is GarageBand not a good editor?
Oh, because I think it's kind of the ripple delete thing. It just makes it very difficult to edit. And when I talk about editing, I'm talking about cutting. Though we can say editing is more inclusive of things like mixing down and noise reduction and the conditioning of the audio stuff.
Yeah, that's to me when I went into GarageBand and I realized I could not highlight and go delete, I went, okay, well that's a deal breaker. Well, that's enough. That's enough for me. I'm out of here.
Not to rag on GarageBand, but to promote all the other DAWs, digital audio workstations. But I was doing a webinar every week since like February. And I kind of run out of different DAWs to highlight, but I'd have a member of the Podcast Editors Club come in and demonstrate their DAW of choice. And one of them was GarageBand. And he showed us how he uses it and all that stuff. About 2 months later, he posted that he's upgrading to Logic Pro, which is like a super advanced version of GarageBand.
Right.
How it's so much better. So even the guy who demonstrated GarageBand moved into a different one.
Yeah, that's what I hear. It's like I have people that have said that. They're like, oh, I did this, and then I whatever it is. I'm not sure how much it is to get into Logic. But when they do, they love it because it does all the things the other ones do. Yeah. So I did have a post here. We were talking about Patreon earlier. What happened was there's a guy named Alan Sisto. He does the Prancing Pony podcast, and he was confused because he set up a Patreon account and he made some kind of basic rewards. That's the whole thing in Patreon. Like with us, if you do this amount, you do this. And if you do $20, you get your name mentioned on every episode. Well, what happened was he didn't make his rewards very, like, it's one of those imposter syndrome, maybe, where you go, well, man, if I could get 10 people to do this, I would do blah, blah, blah. Well, he's been doing this, I think he said a couple months. He said, but all of a sudden he's like, I've hit all my rewards. I got to come up with a new one. So I would say the first thing is don't sell yourself short. But somebody replied to this and he said, the first thing we did was, instead of starting with a Patreon, we waited till there was a pent-up demand for it. And I think that's a pretty good advice there. He says, we started the show in February 2016 and didn't launch Patreon until 2017, even though we were hearing from folks about supporting the show a few months earlier. Then we did a pre-launch video and a promotion on the show and our social media channels, teasing some of the special content and the swag. So when we finally did launch, it was a big deal for our listeners. Ended up with nearly 50 signed up in the first month. He goes, now we have 150 patrons and climbing. So
boom.
Yeah.
Boom.
Well, the thing I mentioned to people is I didn't realize that my Patreon account, I started like 3 years ago. And so I have a goal where we just did one where I said, if we get over $300 a month, I will do an extra hour for patrons only. Come in, ask your questions. And it's kind of like Ask the Podcast Coach, except it's private. And it took me 3 years to get there. But it's there now. We have a lot of fun doing that. And so don't, and I actually put one, Josh Liston is using it. I said, hey, it's almost 50% off one-on-one consulting. And I'm like, well, nobody's going to pay $125 a month. Well, Josh is, and he's loving it. So you always make that one tier. You're like, nobody's going to do that, because you never know. Somebody may actually pull you up on that. Yeah. You're like, oops. The other thing, Steve, what do you think the monthly charges of a podcast should be? What do you think? If somebody says, how much does it cost to run a podcast? We know you have to buy the equipment up front, but once it's up and going, ballpark, what do you think it costs? Assuming that they're not smart enough to use your services. They're doing everything themselves.
Hey, they can do it all themselves. That's what I did for the entire run of Money Planets OS. What does it cost? Okay, so I would recommend the hosting would need to be between $12 and $20, depending on where you go. That's a legitimate, okay, here's the answer you always get whenever you ask about podcasting. It depends. It depends.
That is.
Because you might only have a show that's 2 minutes, twice a week or something like that. It's a news report, 10 minutes, 3 times a week. It doesn't take a lot of space to host that. Then it depends on, how much you compress your files and all that stuff. So starting with hosting, I definitely think you need to pay for hosting. That's for sure. The service that you get, or if you ever have a problem, the service that you require, you need to pay for that. And it's not expensive. Web hosting, you should have a website, in my opinion. That depends on what you need for your web host. Do you need just a landing page, or do you need something that has something like a member page where you can log in and they get other stuff like a course or something like that? That could be anywhere from $3 to, you can make it up to $100. I hate this question because it depends. It all depends. But I think the bottom line, if you're going to run a podcast, you need hosting, you need a website. I can't think of anything else that you have to have.
I usually tell people it's $30 or less, because you figure if you throw in a domain, that's like $2 a month. And then you throw in, let's say $20 for hosting and $10 for your website. You're looking at $30 maybe, because you don't always need 20 for hosting, and websites are anywhere from $4 to $12. And so that's why I'm always kind of, and then I saw the phrase of the person on Facebook that said, as a college student. And I'm like, well, there's the problem. You have no money. He says, my expenses have piled up over the years, and the thought of creating a Patreon has come up. I host a show called The Rattle, which covers the Arizona Diamondbacks baseball team. What have you guys experienced with Patreon been? And that's, like I said, for me, it's been over 3 years. It's a slow burn. You have to treat it like a sponsor. It's not a case where you can put a Patreon button on your website and go, okay, you've got to have some sort of rewards, or you have to at least tell people about it. Would you recommend it? I like the last guy's thing. Wait till people are asking you, hey, how can I support you? He says, we're getting over 400 downloads per episode on average per week. And I always tell, there's a book from Jared Easley from one of the guys behind Podcast Movement. He has a whole section in there with example after example after example of how in some cases you're going to get 3% of your audience. It just seems to be, here's a guy that did a study. He had 3% of his audience. So if you're doing 400 downloads and you times that by 3%, that's 12 people. And if everybody's giving you $5, there's your $60 a month. And so this is where I sometimes get worried when people want to make a living just from their podcast. I think in many cases, I would think, Steve, in your case with all the financial peeps, they're just using the podcast as a marketing arm, aren't they?
Well, I think everybody should.
Yeah.
Not everybody, but
Yeah.
at least in a lot of the business podcasts, it needs to be some kind of a way to get your brand out there. Now, that's different, though, for a show like Stacking Benjamins. His job is creating Stacking Benjamins, and his job is to increase listenership because he is basing almost everything he does on download numbers because he sells
Sponsorship.
to sponsors.
Yep.
And he does it right. But yeah, if you're just doing you're talking about, and here's your $60 from getting 12 people to pay you $5 a month. Let's not make that the goal.
Right.
Because then what are you doing the show for? It's got to be your time is more valuable than $60 a month. It is. You need to be, your goal needs to be growing this thing to be bigger than just making your hosting fees, even if this is a hobby.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, let's say you do, I don't know, a 45-minute show, takes you 5 hours a week to do that. Okay. So that's 20 hours a month, $60 a month divided by 20 hours, you're making $3 an hour. Then that's where I'm like, now you're getting into musician territory. I remember once I did the math on, you played for 2 hours and you made $50 a person. You're like, wow, $25 an hour. You're like, yeah, but we practiced twice. We've practiced, 4 times to get the one gig. That's another 8 hours. And all of a sudden you look like, wow, we made 18 cents an hour for that gig. So
but you can't book a 3,000 seat venue in your first year.
Right.
You're not going to do it. It's a long play. Podcasting is a long play.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of an epic fail. It was my podcast. I launched Money Plan SOS as a marketing arm for my financial coaching. I was building a financial coaching business and I made money along the way. But if you added up the hours and did the division like you did, I totally lost money. However, and this is just kind of a weird twist of fate, and it might just be, the inspiring piece of information everybody needs to hear here, is that led me to what I'm doing now. Now, it's indirectly how it led me to what I'm doing now, but I am making more now at podcast editing than I did at the day job that I was doing while I was building Money Plan SOS in the financial coaching business. So you never know where it's going to take you, but don't make $60 a month your goal, please.
Yeah. Well, to give you a hint, a shade into my speech for the Hall of Fame thing, I've been doing this a lot, taking like the big 10,000 foot overview of just where I've been, where I come from. And I think it boils down to this: content leads to relationships, which leads to opportunities.
Yes.
And when you're at that opportunity, if you provide good content, it leads to more relationships, which leads to more opportunities. And it just over and over and over again. And I think that's exactly what you did with your show. The show itself, you're saying, was losing money on it, but that got you into, the Joel Sosi highs and all the other, the FinCon world and that whole 9 yards, which is now, got you happy as a clam in the basement.
Yep.
Editing podcasts, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. There's no way that relationships piece, if it was missing, there's no way I'd be doing what I am now.
Yeah.
Not saying that I would be doing something I didn't enjoy, but I love this. And this has become something really big for me. And so other people need to think about that. The podcast, very often I see the podcast is not the end game for them. The podcast, it leads them to something else. We see a lot of podcasts that pod fade. Maybe they moved on to something better. Austin Netsley, I'll use him as an example. This is I met him in 2012. He had a podcast called Young Professional, I forget what it's called. No, I forget. But he did it for a few years and it got him to meet some people and it positioned him into a better place where he could then launch this other business, which has nothing to do with podcasting, but it all led to that spot. And he's just rocking it, But his podcast was, was great. But it was the opportunities that he got from the relationships he built by having that podcast.
That's it. I'm copying and pasting things from the chat room here.
Yeah.
Addie says, James Cridlin, which we'll probably talk about here shortly, from podnews.net. It's a great newsletter, is pitching that podcasters stop using the word subscribe to grow their audience because he believes it gives the impression it's something to pay for. Is there solid data demonstrating that? And then email and YouTube are popular examples of having you subscribe. That's a great. So I guess we'll just talk about that now. I'm not sure. The only thing I can say is James has a pretty wide view, from his chair. He works, he's from kind of the radio world, and I don't say that in a negative way, but I mean, he's worked a lot in radio and the BBC. His credentials go on forever. He's a really cool guy. So maybe he's seeing things that we don't, but I guess because this is where I'm like, dong it. I kind of started in the podcasting thing, and I knew from day one that they were free. So I'm not sure, if that's a problem or not. And if so, what do you call it? Or do you just make sure to say subscribe for free in Apple Podcasts?
If you're going to say subscribe, it's free and you won't miss the next episode. The benefit of subscribing isn't because you get another person who's automatically going to subscribe, get your next episode. The benefit is that they're going to get your next episode automatically. And so subscribing is the way to do that. And I think it's the appropriate name for it. I do believe that's right, but we have to also then say somehow that it's not going to cost you anything.
Right. Because if we use the Twitter analogy, follow us in Apple Podcasts. Well, unfortunately, they're going to go over there looking for a follow button and see subscribe and go, that must not be it. So I think that's part of the problem is you have to say the word that's in the app. And I'm not sure what it says in Stitcher, or I know in Overcast it says subscribe, so I don't know. I don't know that it may be confusing people who, again, if we go back, are coming in completely green.
Yeah.
But maybe we just need to, that's one of those things where it's the curse of knowledge. We know it's free. So why would I even mention that? But to somebody who's like, what's a podcast? Do I need an iPhone to listen to that? You're like, oh, okay, hold on. That's an internet radio show, sir. And that's fine, because there's still 60% of people are in that boat. But maybe we need to do that. The article, and Steve put a link here in the show notes, and I will have a link in the show notes out at askthepodcastcoach.com/218 by the time you hear this. And James also says that he's talking about how when you have a link to, like, there's some app called, I think it's Breaker. And, here's the one for Overcast and Breaker and Google Play or Google Podcasts, Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, blah, 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 blah. And so his whole point is, if we do that, what does that do to the person who's never, is asking, do I need a smartphone for that? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, what the heck are we doing? If we have somebody listening to our show and we're saying subscribe to our podcast well, they're already in their app of choice, or they'll eventually move to one that they think is better, because they're not going to hear from you that this app is better than the others. Or if you do, maybe they'll listen to you, but that shouldn't be your call to action. Your call to action should be subscribe wherever you are for free. And I think the best way to do this, in my opinion, is have a landing page on your website where people can go. They can contact you. They can find where you are on Twitter, Facebook, wherever you want them to find you. But then you also have buttons for, if you want, you can have buttons for each and every one of these apps. But make that at the bottom. Put all those options at the bottom. Make your call to action, just like in your podcast, make your call to action prominent. Make it right there. This is what you should do. Don't go to the toothpaste aisle and look around for the right toothpaste. This is the toothpaste you want. It's right here, top shelf, big and bold. And that's the way we need to do it if we're going to have people go and actually try to subscribe to our show wherever they want to go.
Yeah, he's saying you should have two buttons, one for Apple Podcasts, one for Google Podcasts. And I'm like,
well, then make those two prominent, but then below that, if you want, you can make all. I just my subscription to Daniel's plugin, Subscribe and Follow, is about to renew. And I just got the update on one of my sites, and there's all these new buttons. I'm like, oh, goody. Now I get to go ahead, Google Podcast to my list. And now I've got to, but now I think I'm going to do it in a different way. I'm not going to have it in the sidebar. That never works. I'm not going to have all of them at the top. I'm going to put a list of them at the bottom, but then have the prominent ones. And I think James has got a point there. The point in his article, which we put the link into in the chat room, and you're putting in the show notes, is drive them to your website, or have a play button on your website. So there's another reason to drive them to your website. If they're listening, they're probably not on your website already, but if they are, great. And then second is 2 places primarily where you're going to find listeners. Apple Podcasts, which is it's the old dog in the fight. It's been around forever. Most people are getting listens from them because they made it easy. Or Google Podcasts, which is going to be the discovery channel for people who are just getting into listening to podcasts on an Android. They're the newbies coming into space. Let's make it easy for the old dogs. And if they're going to Apple Podcasts, they probably have an app that they'd rather go and search for you anyway.
Yeah.
Or Google Podcasts. So web page, play button, 2 big buttons there saying, okay, well, here's the 2 main choices, and then they can go to any of the others that you have. You want to listen down at the very bottom.
Yeah, the play button is something that I try to have on every one of my podcasts, because I've been playing with different themes, and you can put a player in your episode, but then the theme only shows the excerpt, and sometimes the excerpt doesn't show a play button. So that's where I will put, either in some cases, I'll go over to player.podtrack.com, and you can put in your RSS feed, and it'll give you a play button based on your RSS feed. So at least there's something to click on and play, because it was, I'm drawing a blank. Ira Glass did a video a while back with, I think it was his mom or somebody was like 80. And he said, go to the website and click play. And that's really, in some cases, what we're looking for. It's kind of tough when you have, this is where I was always asked the question, is this a podcast that promotes your business? If so, there better be a play button. I understand if your website is a business that also has a podcast, that's where things get a little tricky, because you might have some sort of I'm getting bombarded with text messages.
Well, I think it again goes back to what is the main reason for your podcast? What is the prominent call to action? If somebody's going to your website, are they there to go listen to your podcast? Because then if they are, then you need to do your call to action within the podcast itself. If they're going to your website, because we'll use Dave Chesson, who does the Kindlepreneur, and he has a podcast called Book Marketing Show Podcast.
Great show, by the way. Great website. Yeah.
I know, it's fantastic. He's got this table. I edited his show and create the blog post for him. So that's
did
why
you?
I'm using this example. Yeah.
I'm sorry for interrupting you. The thing I love that I got to get into my websites, it's kindlepreneur.com. And I've seen other people do this, but he was the one that I was like, okay, I'm doing this. I love the start here button.
Mm-hmm.
I love it, because then you go there and it's like, because I mean, some of us that have been doing it a while, you're like, oh man, the good news is everything you need is here. The bad news is there's so much content. So he's like, look, if this is you, click here. If you're doing this, then over here. And he guides you through his website. And so I didn't know you were the man behind this website. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, for the past few months. Pretty fun. And Emily actually does the show notes. I hired her Emily Prokop does the writing of the show notes for the show. So we team up and tackle this thing, because he's rocking it. But anyway, if you go to kindlepreneur.com, you'll see he's got the menu at the top, just like every other website. But then he's got the big call to action right there at the top third. Sell more books. I'll show you how. Sign up. Boom. There's his call to action. So why does he have a podcast? It leads people who are audio listeners like we are to go to his site and subscribe to this lead magnet, or this email funnel that's going to get you into his ecosystem, and he's going to lead you down the path that you wanted to get into because you were interested. You listened to the show. Now the podcast, the site is not a podcast. The site is not there to support the podcast. The podcast is there to support his site. And so if you go down, you'll see there's nothing about his podcast at all, except the buttons to the podcast. So there you go. If you're going to be a listener to his podcast, you're not finding them from the website. You're probably finding them from social media. You're probably finding them from word of mouth from somebody else. So his website is there to support his business. The podcast is there to lead people to his business on the website.
I see in the chat room here, Illiquity, kind of we're talking, and this is the fun part. Steve, we'll be in a subject and we're like, oh, remember that thing we were talking about 10 minutes ago? We're going to bring it back because I missed this.
Okay.
She says, and then we'll probably right back to your website thing. We're all, it's an hour of Squirrel, if you've ever seen the movie Up. But Illiquity says the thing for me when it comes to monthly expenses, she says, if I wasn't super passionate about my thing, I wouldn't do it. That I think is key. I always tell people you need to have that passion and you need to have the ability to do this for free and as if nobody was listening. Because when you first start, you're paying money to do it and nobody's listening. She says, my expenses are more than $100 a month. My work time looks like the following. I get up at 5:45. Oofa. It just makes me tired hearing that. With a 13-year-old for 8 hours, then the gym, then dinner, and then work on my podcast. Lots of drive and determination. Yeah, you need that. And I know some people get frustrated because they'll hear somebody say, well, I work on my podcast from 6 to 10. And somebody go, well, I don't have 4 hours to work on my podcast. You'd be amazed at how much you can get done in a half hour. And if you do a half hour every day, that it adds up. Now, granted, you're not going to be running as fast as the person who's doing 4 hours a day. But I always say the easiest way to suck all the joy out of your life, I mean, just open up a giant vacuum, is start comparing yourself to others, and the joy will just be, and you're like, oh, I used to have fun doing this, but now so-and-so is doing that. And just, I hate to see that. I've seen that. Remember one time I was working with somebody and literally like 10 minutes ago, I'm like, how's everything going? Oh, I can't believe people are listening to me and this guy, and he's going to come on my show and da-da-da. And then somebody in Facebook, like, I just crossed the 250,000 download. And they're like, it's just all the joy went right out of their life. So
don't talk downloads, talk interactions with your listeners.
Yeah.
There's another reason right there.
Yeah.
How many of those 250,000 downloads did you hear from your listeners? But if you get 400 and you hear from 10 of them, what a great ratio. And you're growing that thing, I bet.
Yeah. Well, I always go back to, I've said this story before, but when I was a musician, we played to a bar, counting the bartenders. There was like literally, I think 6 or 7 people. There was like one table of people in this whole place. And then like maybe 12 if you count the bartenders and stuff. But one of those guys had a birthday party. And at that birthday party, he bought us out of merch. Like he bought everybody a t-shirt. So that was very lucrative. And we played that gig like we were playing at the, Madison Square Garden. We did our whole thing to 6 people, and you'd get done and you'd hear, woo, it's like, that's it,
but you're walking out with a wad of cash in your pocket. So
yeah. So
you're laughing all the way to the bank, literally.
Yeah. And just to end that story, that bar eventually burned to the ground because it went out of business, oddly enough, with 6 people coming in it. And somebody turned it into a meth lab. So there you go. Happy stories all the way around. Let's see. The chat room is going on. Oh, this is do you have any problems with people as an editor? You're kind of stuck with whatever people give you. Are there any things you see that people give you that you're like, they need to do blank? Because for me, I'm finding issues with USB devices that don't give enough oomph to whatever software you're using. Do you run into anything of that?
Well, there's always something. Yeah. There's always something. I mean, I've got, a client with the problem A or problem B, and it's going to be something that I'm coaching them through one-on-one. We'll talk. Okay. So I have one client. I was just pulling his stuff up because we got an episode coming out on Monday, and he had a recording device that would just record him one channel. First of all, it would only record left channel, but I can fix that. No problem. But it was really low. So of course we have to amplify that, and that amplifies the room noise, which now we have to do more noise reduction to clean it up better. But I was able to work with them through, like a screen sharing thing, and try to troubleshoot a little bit of his setup. And he's been able to amp up that volume now, so it's better. So there are solutions. Of course, you got to work them through, and that's the problem. Yeah. And everybody's situation, their setup is different. The way they perform is different. Their vocals are different. Plain as day, a woman's vocal is different than a man's. Plain as day. Yeah. And you can actually see it in the waveform. It's that distinct. You can tell when the guy's speaking versus the girl. It is, for me at least. So it depends. right?
There's that answer again. It depends. Well, I'm actually going to tell you about a tool that might just change your life when it comes to supporting people. We will be talking about that in the post show. This is weird. Normally I would ask what's coming up on your podcast, but do you miss doing Money Plan SOS?
I miss podcasting. And I think I do miss Money Plan SOS. I don't have the drive to create that type of content anymore. But if I can, I'd like to talk about what I'm doing.
Oh, go right ahead.
It's all about Podcast Movement. Podcast Movement coming up in July 24th through 26th. I'll be running the Podcast Pavilion, which is live podcast recordings. We'll have the setups there, sponsored by TalkShoe and Heil. We've got Heil as the sponsor this year. They're bringing PR40s. I'll be doing that.
You said the magic word.
Here.
I don't know if you can hear that. That is the love. Yeah. Speaking of Emily Prokop. Excellent.
Yes. So we'll be having that set up. I'm organizing that. You got to be in Podcast Movement to know where to go to sign up for that. I'll also be speaking with Emily Prokop and Joel Sharpton on Wednesday at 2:30. And we'll be talking about how to make a living or just making money as a podcast editor.
You just put up a website. That's it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then at 4 o'clock, we'll be walking over to that meetup. And then there's the hall room discussions, after parties. If you see me there, please stop by, pull me aside. I'll be in the Podcast Pavilion the majority of the time. And I'd love to say hi.
Yes. If you don't know Steve Stewart, fix that. He's a good guy to know. He's easy to find. And he's the thing that it's hilarious is when I first got to know you, I was just like, every time I turn around, there was Steve Stewart. It's like, oh, I'm listening to this show. And we have a voicemail. It's from Steve Stewart. And then I'd go to something and there was a comment from Steve Stewart. And then I'd go to my inbox and there was a voicemail from Steve Stewart. I was like, who is this Steve Stewart guy? So, and then you get to know him and you're like, oh, this guy's awesome. So very cool. But yeah, we are here every Saturday. AskThePodcastCoach.com/live. I thank you to the chat room. We're going to stick around here for a little bit and do some post show. And this week on the School of Podcasting, I have no idea what I'm talking. I think I'm talking about imposter syndrome, because I've been doing a lot of research on that, because that's something we all struggle with. I think I'm ready to harvest all that work that I've been doing into that. But thanks so much for listening. Stick around for some post show, and we'll be back in 17 seconds. Oh, it's because it's the wrong knob, Dave. I'm like, why is that not making the lights blink? Hold on, I got to shut it for 5 seconds.
We'll fix it in post. Oh my gosh, this is the after show, right?
Yeah, we have to shut up for 5 seconds. Because I go into YouTube later and I whack the post show from the video so that only patrons can get it. And Ross, just so you know, the thing I talked about on Facebook with you yesterday, I'm doing as soon as the show is over. So Ross signed up to be he did. He signed up to be an affiliate for the School of Podcasting. And so I'm going to make a special link for Ross that when people go to it, he has a coupon. He has, so if you want to be an affiliate for the School of Podcasting.com, go to schoolofpodcasting.com/affiliates. And I will do the same thing for you. And we'll both get madly rich or not. We'll try. So. But yeah, podcast movement should be fun. If you're new to the whole podcast movement, Steve, advice for the newbie?
Oh gosh, I've gotten this question like 3 times. Go to the schedule, have a plan, but don't be upset that you're going to miss a lot of those sessions you want to go to, because of the biggest benefit. You're going to talk to people in the hallways. You're going to learn so much in the hallways, and definitely in the expo. You know what? With Podcast Movement and with FinCon, both of these conferences have fantastic expos where it's not just a bunch of vendors. This is places to go, learn, try. Man, the expo is fantastic.
Nice. Yeah. And I always say, bring comfortable shoes. If you want to save money, what I usually do is I will go to the hotel breakfast nook and get a bottle of water, because a lot of times what these events will do is they'll have these little baby cups that you can get water with, and I'm like, well, that's great, except I'm in a booth and I'm so it's like in the old West, I'm off to get a water run, so I'll take a bottle of water, drink that, but when it's empty, I do not throw away the bottle, and then when I go back to the water jug or whatever they have, I fill up my water bottle. So bring comfy shoes, stay hydrated, and breath mints and chapstick are other things that are greatly appreciated. And realize, and sleep is optional. It really is. It's not something that I like to do, but you're at a one-time only event, take advantage of it. And I laugh because Facebook does the thing where it shows you what you did 2 years ago, and I had a video of me and I had no voice and I had been getting like 4 hours sleep, and I sounded like Barry White. It's always fun. Yes, run up to me and I'm a hugger. Addie says, run up to me and give me a hug. I'm a big hugging person. And Emily says, Emily, if you log into your School of Podcasting affiliate program, there's a video that shows you how to get your link. It should be in the upper right-hand corner. And then I believe I need to double check. And there's links to more graphics and such. That's the one thing I wish Thinkific would kind of update. Their affiliate program works and it's great. And I pay people, etc. But there's no like tracking of how many people clicked a link or how many. It's kind of, that part is like, I love Thinkific, but their affiliate program is functional. But as somebody who does affiliate marketing for other products, it's nice to see if anybody's clicking on it or not. So you can always make your own with Pretty Link or things like that. But it's kind of like, not exactly. And Craig says, yes, and business cards. Now, Steve, what is your philosophy on business cards? Like, are you the business card ninja, where the minute you meet somebody, you just right in their neck and they,
no.
Okay.
And usually I forget. I ask for them, but I forget to give them. And if I do give them, I've learned to leave a blank space where you can write somewhere on the card. Usually it's just the entire backside. And one thing I'm going to do on my next line of business cards, and this is kind of a website hack into a business card thing, is I will now have my domain, stevestewart.me / and then a blank line, because I use Pretty Link for a whole bunch of stuff. So if I want them to go somewhere specific, now I just have to write one word. Say, here, go to stevestewart.me / Audacity. And that's where my Audacity course is. Go to stevestewart.me / I don't know, whatever else.
Right.
Podcast, and it'll take you to the podcast page, whatever.
That's cool.
Yeah. That way you don't have a ton of information, and you can customize it to the person you're handing the card to. And I think they are a little more likely to keep it if you write something on there manually, rather than there's a pile of business cards that I picked up while, visiting all the vendors, and I met that one guy, but it's mixed in with all the vendor cards.
Right. I made the mistake, and I just realized that I've been doing this I always tell people, use the coupon code listener when you sign up. I never tell people what that does. I've never said it saves you 20%. I'm like, what that? And I think the reason for that is I might change that in the future. Like, it might be 25, it might be 15, but it's like, I think that's why I did that generically. But I'm like, I'm not telling people why. Same thing here on my business card. I have coupon card, but it doesn't say what the coupon does. And like, I should probably explain that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember the first event I went to, everybody I met, I gave a business card, and now I usually have a conversation. And if I want to give them a card, I will ask them, do you have a card?
Yeah.
And they will usually say, do you have a card? As a matter of fact, I do.
A fine tip Sharpie is always welcome in your pocket when you have business cards.
That's it. A fine tip Sharpie. I mean, it should just be in your pocket. Is there ever a time when you go, I have a Sharpie. Oh, I don't need this. Cause it's always like, no, there's always something to write on. There's always, when I was in a band, that was always the best. You had duct tape and a Sharpie. You were good for life. You could do anything. So let me see here. Steve, do you use Trello with any
I only do with one client, and I have not learned it yet, so I'm frustrated.
Okay. Because that's something I'm playing with. I'm actually making a course for the School of Podcasting, because I had more and more people saying this is, because for the longest time it was Evernote. Everybody organizes everything in Evernote. And I have a course on Evernote at the School of Podcasting, but more and more people are like, Trello. And I'm like, what is this Trello thing? And it's kind of like Evernote, only it's much more visual. Just to show you guys what I did today, just to play with it. Since we're in post show, we do. This is, you can see here's the podcast movement share, Patreon goals, subscribers obsession, monthly charges. Here's another one. I'll put this in the chat room. Mike Phillips, for those of us that remember Mike Phillips, except I just clicked on the wrong thing. Found an actual shock mount, the ATR 2100. But the problem with those things is they show up on Amazon, and that's just a shock mount. I'm dying to find one of these. I love this. It's a shock mount / pop filter for the 2100. And I've had probably 3 companies that will come in and they'll make one. They sell out and they never come back. It's like they made who knows? Like they made 500 of them. And then they're like, oh, well, nobody else is going to buy one of those. And it's just gone.
That was a shock mount?
That is a shock mount. If I turn
it around, clip, but it's
it's
a very tight clip because the ATR is so fat.
Yeah, and it's you got the rubber bands in it, and then you've got this little and then usually there used to be 2 screws. I lost one, but I can adjust this in and out. And then this just pops in. There is one from, I hate this company, Newer. That I saw one where they have a little stand, but the stand is into but there's no pop filters, just a shock mount. So I'm kind of like, they keep selling out. To me, that would be a sign that, I don't know, maybe we should make some more. But I've seen 2 or 3 different companies now that they make them. People like, this is great, this is awesome, and they buy them and then they sell out and they never, I don't know. To me, that's, as a business, I'm like, if it's sold out, that kind of proves there was, so
yeah, they did their one manufacturing run in Taiwan and ran out of supply, and
so that was a little odd.
Daniel says he found one on Amazon.
Oh, there you go. Let me see. We're over.
So somebody new is coming in the space with another,
that's
manufacturing lot of 500, and then they'll run out, and then we'll have somebody else new come in the space. And
what are your thoughts? This was another question in Facebook. What are your thoughts on episode numbers? Do they go in the title? If so, where? Do they go at all? Do you use episode numbers?
For every one of my clients, I almost require that we have episode numbers, but they don't go into the title. Some will put it in the title just because that's the way they want it. And of course they're going to put it in the title. But I will use the tools. The majority of my clients are in Libsyn, so we'll use the iTunes feed tag for the episode number, but not include it in the iTunes title.
There you go.
It's still in the episode title for a lot of my clients, but I started out that way. I had the acronym and the episode number at the beginning of my blog post and of course my podcast, and it was ugly. I eventually went back and changed them all. And I'm so much happier that I did move them to the end for a while, and I still have a lot of them listed that way. I just haven't spent the time to go back and actually take them out. But that was all before the iTunes feed tags the new iTunes feed tags were November last year or September last year, something like that. So episode numbers in titles only if you have to have them and refer people back to a specific number. Though if you have PrettyLink on a WordPress website, use PrettyLink to use a redirect to the actual blog post. And, so like kindlepreneur.com/E28, have that redirect to the blog post. It doesn't help people find the podcast unless, of course, you have the episode numbers in the podcast app. So I don't know. I mean, I think we still have to wait for Apple to come out with the real reason why they did this, because they haven't actually instituted it in the app, or at least I haven't seen it, where the episode numbers make sense, where they actually are used.
Well, I know Amazon, which is kind of odd, uses the Apple information so that, like, if you have a Libsyn Amazon skill, you can say to the woman in the tube, play episode number blah, blah, blah of the School of Podcasting.
Okay, well, that's good.
And I'm assuming eventually the other woman in the phone will do the same thing. I'm trying to see here real quick. Okay, this should work. Because Ross has a question. Should I record? Do you recommend recording interviews to use later on your podcast during podcast movement? How open are most people to doing that, or would they rather just chat and network? It depends on, I think, on the person. And I'm looking here because I have one. Or so I
It
thought.
depends. Came up again.
Yeah, there it is. I think this is the right channel.
I'm in the hallway at Podfactor with the one and only Mark Deal and Mr. Atlanta Podcast Dude.
Yeah. So this is a case where I had Mark. There wasn't time to run back and grab equipment and things like that. And I'm talking into my phone like this. And when it was time for Mark to talk, I just did that. And I just realized I don't normally use the audio tool on my phone a lot. A lot of times if I want to mark something, I'm listening to a podcast, I'll take a screenshot. And then I can go into my photos and see there's something here on this podcast that I want. But yeah, it's a great place. The only thing that I always worry about is if I'm at a party and everybody's networking, we're having a good time, and somebody comes up and says, "Can I interview you now?" And I'm like, I'm having a good time. Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
I have my phone with me, so I will schedule it for later. I will put it in my phone and say, "Hey, meet me in the lobby at blah blah blah," and then we'll go find a place. If I can't do it right then, of course I'll try to do it right then. If it's just gonna be a short 5-10 minutes, but I have to ask that question.
That's the depends. That's it. If you want to do an hour long, you could ask them, and some people might say, "I would love to be on your show, but can we do that? If we're going to do an hour, can we do it later?" And now you've kind of lost the face-to-faceness of it. But
right. Oh yeah. I definitely want to try and get it done there, just because the atmosphere, even if it's noisy, it's better just for an environment of this is happening now, and you might be listening to it later, but this was at a conference. There's something magic about that.
Yeah. So you can try. All they can say is no, and if they say I don't have time here, that's when you say, "Can we? I'd still love to have you on the show. Here's my business card. Blah blah blah." However you want to do that, and then just. You do it later. The good news is you've made that connection, and that's that relationship that leads to opportunities. So, but some people may not be, some people just book their, well, from here, I'm going to dinner with so-and-so and blah, blah, blah. Like Wednesday night, I'm now going to dinner with Hindenburg, which is kind of interesting. They said, "Hey, what are you doing? We're doing this thing on Wednesday night. Do you want to come?" And I'm like, okay. Again, relationships lead to, because I don't, who knows?
See, now when you get to the point where you're being asked to go to those dinners, that's really cool, because now you're being invited to something specific you can put on your calendar. I just know that for a fact that I'm going to be spending a lot of money on food, because I'm going to go wherever I can, whenever I get the chance.
Right.
That's just the way to do it. And that's the best way to do it, because then you're meeting somebody you've never heard of. They're interested in learning more from you, or you're learning from them. You get that one-on-one or a group even, just go to dinner. It's the best place. I'll be eating way too much in this conference.
Yeah. Liquid says, "I wouldn't ask for an interview unless I was trying to get a conversation." Oh, wait, maybe I'm missing that. I wouldn't unless I was trying to get out of a conversation. It's never 5 minutes.
Oh, somebody asks you for a quick interview and it turns out to be 30.
Yeah. And Ross says, "I wouldn't ask somebody for an hour. I would ask for 5 and 10 and then go to 15 or 20. Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool idea though, because if you've got a specific thing you want to discuss, ask 10 people for their best money tip, and then group them together in one episode. I've heard of people that did something similar to that, and they say it's one of their most downloaded episodes.
Well, I have the segment. I can't find it right now. I have a Zoom H1 and I don't use it a whole lot. And I took it to Podfactor, forgot about it. I got a bunch of recordings on this thing for people doing what were the last 5 podcasts they listened to because of my podcast story. And because I don't use this, I'm like, I took it out of the suitcase and threw it on the desk and completely forgot I'd done a bunch of recordings. Same thing on my phone. So yeah, if you have any kind of segment or tip or whatever, that's a cool way to do that. And then of course, you've got that relationship. They may share it. You never know. I have done this. If I do anything, like anytime I do like the question of the month kind of thing, I always put the time code next to that person, because we are all so vain. And I just want to hear the part where I am. So if I can give them a link to click on to where they go right to their part, that's always handy. And then in some cases, they can actually share out at that part if they're using Overcast or something like that. So, but yeah, so it's a great place I get a lot of, I used to go around when I wasn't, and I'm not complaining, but when I wasn't tied to the Libsyn booth, I would go around and interview every single vendor or any vendor that, hey, tell me about what this is. Oh, well, this is the thing. And I still might do that occasionally. It depends. It usually Podcast Movement, we're hammered from the minute it opens to the minute it closes. So I'm usually not leaving the booth a whole lot. This is going to be fun. It's an 8-foot booth. It's shorter. It's not as wide. And I think we have 7 people. So I'm going to be interested to see how that's going to work. But I know a lot of us, it's almost like a tag team. Like, okay, Rob's back. Okay, here, you go leave, you go talk. Okay, here comes Elsie. Okay, good. You stay here. So that should be fun. Yeah, exactly. Vendors are typically, and that's why I used to go on the last day. Because at this point, it's kind of sad because on one hand, the vendor's like, oh my God, if I have to explain this one more time. But on the other hand, they're bored. There's nothing makes a day go longer than when you're at a conference and there's nobody coming up so that you can answer questions or whatever. So yeah. But if they're stacked and they've got 6 people and you walk up and say, can I interview you right now? They're going to go, no, I've got 6 people I got to talk to. So, but again, if nothing else, you can establish that relationship. I've actually got a Tascam unit coming from somebody I met at PodFest. And I'd actually played with it once before, but it was in beta, like it wasn't even officially released and it didn't really work that well. And I was listening to Tascam now has a podcast called Tascam Talkback. And they were just raving about it. And in it, they mentioned that they updated the drivers because, hey, they didn't quite understand this whole podcasting thing. And they didn't realize that this is what podcasters wanted, to be able to separate tracks and things like that. So I emailed them and I said, hey, I had one of those at one point. I didn't like it. It sounds much better. Can I have one to play with and send back? And they're like, sure. What's your address? So, and then of course,
the model.
It's the, no, it's not new, but they updated the guts.
The DR40.
Yeah, it's the it's the one with the 2 inputs.
Yeah, I think it's the DR40 or 60. I always forget. I've got a video I'm going to be putting together for the Zoom H6 because the H5 and the H6 are superior recording devices for podcasters in any situation, almost any situation. I can't think of a single one right now that wouldn't make sense because you can you take the output from your computer and plug it into one channel, your microphone in the other. They can hear, your guest can hear you through the built-in mic if you don't have an ATR where you can run the USB to it. You can use it as the man on the street thing, like you were talking about with your phone at the expo, just back and forth. Or you can sit there with 4 people and 4 different mics. It's so maybe if Tascam comes out with something similar, we've got another player in the space. Yeah, I know they've got the 2-1, but what about a 4 channel with dials for every channel?
Oh, now we're talking. Yeah,
I don't want to go push buttons to do that. I want to dial.
Yeah, they have some cool things where you can assign sounds to buttons, like so if I wanted to, I don't know, whatever.
Like a soundboard, built-in soundboard.
Yeah, like if I needed, David Lee Roth for whatever reason, you can do that. So that's kind of cool. But I'm with you. So it's hard to beat the thing you just mentioned.
The Zoom H6.
Oh yeah, the H6. Yeah, that's I have one here.
Yeah.
Yet to open it. I have enough people asking me for this. I'm like, okay, I need one because I have an H5. I was like, probably should go get one. So they're pretty handy. Liquidy says, when I go to gluten-free expos, I have vendors fill out a pre-interview form on my iPad. We're going to come back to that in a second. So if I don't get to them at the show, I can follow up later. That's kind of cool. Then I schedule them for the next day. And I can say in the follow-up that I was following up for an interview from the form they just filled out. Yep, there you go. Starting that funnel basically for interview guests. And Steve, have you played with the Mix Pre 3 yet?
No, I just changed. No, not at all. I think you did, and I'm pretty sure Daniel has a tutorial or something in there.
I have Chris Curran has one. He has a Mix Pre 6, which is like $1,000. And it's one of those where you have to, I'm now better at realizing when the shininess is sucking me in. And I'm just like, oh, I'm good. And you start like the credit card in your wallet starts to get warm. And you're like, no, this, what I have is fine. It's not really, this doesn't do exactly what I wanted to do. And when I sent back the Mix Pre 3, I had one on loan. It hurt. I was like, oh, I really want this to stay. Can't you? Oh, well. And it's one of the few times that usually when you record with a different preamp or whatever, it's hard to really hear the difference in noise. We're talking a noise floor, the difference of this and that. And this, I was like, that's just ridiculously clean. It was like, wow, okay. So that one hurt to send back, but it's also, I think the Pre 3 is 600 and the Pre 6 is 900 or so. It's a lot. It hurts when you buy those. So
you need to be doing a show. It's at least an hour long for every week, or you need to be doing multiple guests, or you need to be doing more shows than one a week to probably make that worth using over other things that are currently out there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I haven't tried it yet, but
yeah, I'm with you. The mix, if somebody, that was another question. I had a Zoom I had a Roland R05 and it just bit the dust. He said, what would you replace it with? And I'm like, well, if you were using the built-in microphones, I mean, this thing went for like 250, I think, back in the day, or 200. You can get by with a Zoom H1. Make sure you get some sort of foam cover on that thing. I have a problem with every Zoom recorder with popping P's, no matter what I put over the top. That's just me. And it seems like you always have to either point it almost away from you, but then you lose your recording quality. But you could get by if you're replacing these with a Zoom H1, because it does have a mic in. So if you're using the line in or whatever it is on this thing, and in terms of fitting in your pocket, that's what I always loved this. So I don't mind the Zoom H1. It's not as durable, where this one was metal, and if you drop it, it's not going to break. I'm not sure about the new Zoom H1, but try the MS capsule instead of the XY. Now there you go. So different things. So
well, if everybody's interested, I've got a Roland Edirol for sale. I've got a Tascam too. I forget the DR07. You don't want this one, but I've got them for sale if anybody wants them.
There you go. Now is that the one?
H6 over here.
Yeah. See, now the Tascam does that have any kind of input jack?
Just the regular, 3.5 millimeter.
Yeah.
And the built-in mics on the top.
That would work. That would replace an H5 or an H5, the Roland R05.
Yes, the Roland. But then I've got the Edirol, which is the predecessor and the one that everybody thinks of when they're thinking of original digital recorders for podcasting.
Yeah. So, but in the end, they're all fairly decent. I think the only one that I go, is the original H4 from Zoom. The preamps on that were not great. And I also found out that if you have the cable wrapped around your leg and get up and throw it across the room, it doesn't live, because it was made out of plastic. I never will forget that. It's in the basement, and I got up and that thing just went right off the desk. It was like, I scooted out my chair, and somehow it was wrapped around something that it created this whole, like, I don't know what you would call it, but it just slingshot. And all of a sudden I pushed back my chair and I just watched the recorder just go like across the room. I'm like, oh, that's not going to end well. And so I actually sold it to somebody because the mics didn't work. There was a couple things, but it's still like, if you used it, like if you plugged a line into it, you could record it, but the rest of it was cracked and ugly. And they're like, I'll give you $40 for it. I'm like, I was going to throw it away. Okay.
Yeah.
So
if they find a use for it, why not?
Yeah. So, but anyway, we're rolling in on 12 o'clock. So we will start
Eastern time.
Eastern Standard Time. Yeah. What time is it where you live?
It'll be 11 in just a couple minutes.
Yeah. There we go. So
an hour away. Thanks
for your time. I deeply appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. It was fun.
And Jim will be back next week, so he can tell us how the wedding went. That's used to be a DJ. Did you ever do weddings?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Do you see what's behind all the t-shirts here?
I figured as much.
The wall of records.
So then you have to have what's the worst best man speech you ever saw?
Oh gosh.
Any off the top of your head?
I block those things out. There's just, life's too short.
Yeah. I was always just amazed at how, like, you've known this wedding has been coming for probably a year, and just train wreck after train wreck. It's like, all right, now we're gonna hear from Tony, and he's like, really, Tony? Seriously? Like, okay. So yeah, how many records do you have?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Jeez,
a couple. Because I thought I had a lot.
Plus a couple of crates in the other room. I got to get rid of some.
Because I used to have, looking at your backdrop there, I used to have basically one of those, like where you have what appears to be three. I had a full bookcase, top to bottom, and that was probably close to like 700-800, something like that. Yeah. And then when I was married, one of my hobbies of my ex-wife was moving, and about literally like every year we would move. And about the fifth time, I was like, okay, I keep moving these. I never listen to them. I just stuck them on the curb, and that will go down as one of life's little regrets, because I'd had enough, and I'm like, I miss my big albums and all the Beatles, and there was two that were collectible that I'm still I had a Quiet Riot album from Japan. I'm like, dude, you didn't save the Quiet Riot album? Come on. But I'd had enough. So at any rate, so thank you, chat room. We will be here next week. That'll be the one before Podcast Movement. And then let me look at the schedule. The 28th. In theory, I will be back because I'll be back Friday. So we'll be back. We won't miss any days due to Podcast Movement. It'd be fun to hear what kind of voice I have on the 28th. So, and then we can all swap Podcast Movement stories and talk about the one session that was really awful or whatever. I never will forget when Google had a representative and he was talking about analytics. And he didn't actually get to analytics till about 25 minutes in of a 40-minute presentation. And just my thing I loved is I looked up and everybody was on their phone. He completely lost his entire audience. So
yes. In fact, if you're going to be a presenter at any conference anywhere, do us people sitting in the seats a favor. Get past the why and get to the how within 3 minutes. Don't tell us why we need to do this. We're already in the seats. You already sold us on the title of your session. Get to the how.
There you go. I'm glad you said that because we start off myself. I'm talking on Thursday at 10 with Jeff Brown from Read to Lead. And we have I'm going to say maybe a minute and a half of why. Because again, know your audience. They already know why. And then we're just going to get into how to make the first 2 minutes of your podcast really, really count. And a lot of people are really, really blowing those 2 minutes.
Yeah. If at the 5 minute mark, you hit them with a thing of beauty in your content, then they'll stick around for the rest. Plus it gives the people who are walking in late the chance to actually,
Yeah, that's it. So, awesome. All right. Well, thank you, peeps. And we'll see you next week. Steve, again, everybody, stevestewart.me. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Dave. See you at the Hall of Fame.
We'll see you, buddy.